In order to understand the connections between Russian fairy tales and visual culture, we need to look briefly at several cultural traditions that influenced fairy tales and were influenced by them. Among these cultural traditions are icon painting, folk visual art, such as Lubok prints, Palek miniatures, and embroidery, and paintings by 19th century Russian artists, such as Viktor Vaznetsov and Ivan Bilibin. So what are icons in religious terms? First, icons were not considered to be works of art. Instead, they were thought of as windows into heaven. Also, icons are not thought to have been painted or created. They were rather imagined as having been uncovered or revealed. The artist is imagined as just the vehicle through which theological truth is conveyed. Icons were not considered as products of the artist's inspiration. Artists followed instructions contained in manuals. However mysterious the interpretation might be, icons are produced by human skill and are meant to be read by humans. So, in order to read and appreciate icons, we need to know their conventions. In addition to visual imagery in the icons, we can see letters and texts. We can see labels or abbreviated names of holy figures, like Greek letters labeling Jesus and Mary, for example. These names are labeled in Greek, even on Russian icons, but less common names might be labeled using Russian letters. We also can find descriptions, longer texts describing events, like the beheading of John the Baptist. In icons, more important figures are generally larger and depicted toward the center. In other words, we have a hierarchical construction of the space. Faces of more important figures are generally turned toward the viewer. Here, for example, you can see that Christ is facing us directly, whereas Mary and John the Baptist half turn their faces. More important figures undergo less distortion in the icons. Why do icons look the way they do? First, because they are designed not to represent objects, but rather the places of objects in the world. Second, the painter's and the viewer's perspective is not privileged in an icon. Finally, instead of a painter's single point of view, an icon employs internal point of view. This results in multiple perspectives in the same icon, as well as an absence of shadows since there is no external source of light. The multiplicity of perspectives might be spatial or temporal. In spatial terms, you might see different sides of an object simultaneously. In temporal terms, you might see events from different times in a figure's life presented together in a single image. Let's see an example. Here we can see temporal multiplicity. The icon of the birth of Jesus shows all actions at once. The icon is read clockwise from top right. Mary and Jesus are in the center, the biggest figures, easiest to see. Other figures are scattered around elsewhere. We see the birth of Christ in a cave, angels, shepherds, Mary with the Christ child, Mary's betrothed, Joseph, entertaining doubt, the old man, but still being holy, he has a halo, and the visitation of the wise men. Spatially, multiplicity of point of view is clearly seen with the example of the chalice. In the icon here, it is shown from at least 2 points of view at once, from the side and from above. This is called a vertical shift. Now let's move on to folk visual art. In particular, we'll talk about Lubok prints, Palek miniatures, and embroidery. A lubok is a simple painted picture colored by hand and often called a popular print, a folk print, or a folk etching. Folk prints were known in many other countries in the Far East as early as the 8th century and in Western Europe from the 15th. In Russia, they appeared in the middle of the 17th century and survived until the beginning of the 20th. The origins of their Russian name have not yet been clearly determined, but it is most likely to do with the name of the material. a layer of wood on which the print was done. In terms of style, Lubbock entertain us with bold colors, expressive lines, balanced compositions, a naive simplicity in the renderings, and the inclusion of large amounts of text in many of the pictures. In this respect, Lubbock might be considered a prototype of comics. The specificity of Lubbock's style is in its combination of the style for Russian icons, manuscript painting traditions, and the ideas and topics of Western European woodcuts. From icon painting, the Lubbock inherited the tradition of making the most important figures disproportionately large in relation to the others. The Lubbock also uses perspective based on multiple points of view. Moreover, the unity of time was as easily violated in Lubbock as in icons. One picture often showed several moments of the same story, with the hero or heroes appearing in several places. Finally, the Lubbock was bright and cheerful, like many Novgorodian and northern icons influenced by folklore. Here we have an example of a satirical Lubbock. It's entitled, Yaga-Baba Rides Off to Fight the Crocodile. It can be interpreted as an old believer satire on Peter and his wife Catherine. The adherents of the old faith called Peter the crocodile, and the figure of Yaga-Baba, a reversed name of the witch Baba Yaga, is shown in the print wearing the traditional Estonian costume in a mockery of Catherine, a native of Estonia. As if to avoid any possible misinterpretation of the woodcut subjects, the author placed a little ship picture in the left bottom corner, hinting at Peter's love for ships and his creation of the Russian Navy. Palek is the name of a town where many icon painters live. In addition to icon painting, Palek masters were involved in mural painting and participated in the decoration and restoration of old churches and cathedrals. After the October Revolution, Palek masters switched from religious to folk and fairy tale motifs. Palek miniatures were done with tempera paints on varnished articles made of papier-mâché or wood. As for themes, the Palek miniatures usually represent characters from literary works, fairy tales, villainy, epic tales, or songs. Palek miniatures are painted with bright local paints over the black background and are known for their delicate and smooth design, abundance of golden shading, and accurate silhouettes of flattened figures which often cover the surface of the lids and sides of the articles. The style of characters, decorativeness of landscapes and architecture, and elongated proportions of the figures all go back to the icon painting traditions. Here you can see a scene from the fairy tale Tsar Sultan. Here we can also notice not only icon-like style, but also icon-like organization of the space. Here is a scene from the fairy tale Vasilisa the Beautiful. Another example of folk art that is connected to Russian fairy tales is embroidery, one of the oldest forms of Russian visual folk culture. Several well-known styles of embroidery, once used in households, are for the most part forgotten after the 19th century. Of what has been preserved, we can distinguish two groups of embroidery, those originating in northern Russia and those from central Russia, respectively. The embroidery of northern Russia, on the left, is marked by a vast use of geometrical patterns and a restricted color scheme, most of the designs executed entirely in red. Reliance on red is closely bound to the widespread acceptance of red as a symbol of beauty. In Russian, the words for red and beauty have the same root. One of the most cherished embroidered images in Russia is the sun chariot, and it is traditionally rendered in red. Another aspect of northern Russian embroidery is a predominant use of horses and riders in patterns. The embroidery of central Russia reflects daily life and elements of nature. Geometric or fluid forms of plants, birds, and animals regularly appear in embroideries of various kinds. Two features set these works apart from northern Russian embroidery: an abundance of colors and an unusual diversity of patterns. Whether in costume or in regular day wear, embroidery displays a complete natural color palette and indicates surroundings and lifestyles of a different kind. In the image, you see a welcome spring pattern. Finally, the names of two prominent Russian artists are associated with folk traditions, and Russian fairy tales in particular, Viktor Vaznetsov and Ivan Bilibin. Vaznetsov became the founder of a new style in Russian painting. This style was characterized by borrowing methods and techniques from national folk art in order to create realistic images of historical and folkloric and mythological subjects. It was a mixture of the realistic depiction of nature with an eye toward fantasy, color, and symbolism. In The Flying Carpet, you see Prince Ivan with the firebird in a cage. Here again we see a motif from a fairy tale. Alyanushka is mourning her little brother Ivanushka, who became a goatling. Here is another fairy tale scene of Prince Ivan riding the gray wolf from Prince Ivan the Firebird and the Gray Wolf. The style is more realistic in The Snow Maiden, although the lighting is rather theatrical. Ivan Bilibin was influenced by Vaznetsov and his folk style. Bilibin's 1899 illustration to the fairy tale Prince Ivan the Firebird and the Gray Wolf announced his own peculiar style, which later will be called the Bilibin style. What is characteristic of Bilibin's style is first, sketching with bold black lines, making a black and white sketch, and then filling it in with watercolor paints. Bilibin's distinctive bold black lines and motley colors are reminiscent of Lubuk's style. Another signature point of Bilibin's style is use of rich ornaments on the borders of the illustration, which reminds us of embroidery. Here is the Frog Princess. Again, bold black lines and ornamented borders. Bilibin usually repeats motifs of the scene on the borders. You can see repetition of arrows, and frogs, perhaps. Here, the composition of the space, ornamental patterns, and bright colors are very similar to Lubuk prints. So icon art, Palek, Lubuk, and embroidery, as well as paintings by Vaznetsov and Bilibin, have influenced and were influenced by Russian fairy tales. Now you will take a quick quiz to test your knowledge.